I don't know, like that's not my first time hearing it. Even restaurants having very blunt signs saying that no foreigners. So you're saying that like they can just be discriminatory?
Yes, legally.
And that's legally.
Okay. Legally, they are allowed to discriminate against groups. But of course it was.
The Splash Bros musical or the Splash Bros movie?
Musical. It did. I saw it in London. I saw it in London, and it died pretty soon after. It was kind of like the Legally Blonde musical.
Shut your mouth. Legally Blonde musical is fucking
was fun.
good.
Was fun. Was fun.
I was going to say.
I think they were trying to.
I'm about to. I will flip this table. I will walk right out.
Hi, Tokyo Tops.
I took your sides.
I have a new topic here because something I want to talk to you guys about. I actually went to a bathhouse recently and was rejected for being a foreigner.
You did.
For being a foreigner. So foreigners are not allowed, I was told. I thought maybe I could speak Japanese, like it was, you know.
You can argue your way out.
I mean, sometimes that's the underlying reason that they don't want to like break the vibe of a Japanese-speaking environment by introducing someone who doesn't speak the language. So I can understand that.
Or even like getting through reception.
Right. Like understanding the rules.
Exactly. The conversation has been happening a lot, I think, in Japan recently regarding like even restaurants. I think it's being talked about on YouTube a bunch, right?
I have seen that.
Right, and then I have seen signs online and around in the city and stuff like that. A lot of the discussion I see online is people arguing back and forth between, it's probably because you don't speak Japanese, and like, should these restaurants have to make an English menu? Should the restaurants have to cater you to blah, 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 right? So I always read it and I don't really have an answer, but you would think that, or I did think that the fact that I can speak Japanese and I can get through reception and speak with everyone, like, it should be okay. But it was like flat out, no, it didn't matter at that point. So I can't tell the story too much or give too many things away because did you know that defamation here is entirely different from, let's say, America?
I did know that it was different. I didn't know the details.
So defamation law in America, I'm not a lawyer, but what I understand is that if it's true, you can talk about it. It's when you're lying about someone that it leads to damage that it becomes defamation. But if you actually tell the truth and it leads to damage, then you can't be held accountable because you're just telling the truth. In Japan, that's not the case. If you damage someone even with the truth, you can be sued for defamation.
Oh, I think that's similar to Korea. I read a similar thing about Korea as well.
Yeah. So anyway, because of that, I'm not going to go into really deep details about it, but I'll tell you guys the background. That's the background, and then I was thinking about doing this video, and I already knew what the comments are going to be. Exactly what we're talking about. That's racist, that's discrimination. We've talked about bathhouses on the video rejecting us for hair or something like that, right? And I think you've talked about in the comments that people sort of get really angry about it. Like, I would do A, B, C, D, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you right? And we usually respond to be like, this is Japan, it doesn't really work that way. It's not America. But I never really thought, why? How is it legal? Because this is not legal in the States.
Legal meaning like
it's not
rejecting a certain type of people.
You can't.
You can.
You cannot.
No, like I went to restaurants in America before, and they were like they have all rights to reject any type of customers.
No.
Like,
that's no. That is more like if you like create a nuisance. They cannot profile you.
I was thinking of this as we were talking. Like in America and other places, we do kind of have like. Not the no foreigners thing, but like a filtering system. Like, it's such a common trope on TV shows, movies to have like the characters in line outside of a club, right? And then the bouncer chooses from the line based on who's hot enough to get it. It's purely the what's that club? Berghain in Germany, right? Is famous for being super exclusive. Why does Japan have this reputation for being discriminatory when these kinds of establishments, which are so predicated on creating a specific vibe, creating a specific mood, don't get the same kind of flack? Like, why?
That's actually really interesting. I didn't think about that. I wonder if there's a loophole there. Like they're not rejecting people based on gender or race or sexuality or something. I don't have the answer, but now I'm curious because you're right. They do have that image for sure.
I think maybe because Japan makes it more explicit that it's actually worse. Like if it was just vibes based, like people could be like, oh, who knows? But if because they're specifically like, okay, it's your hair, it's your body, it's your weight, it's your race, it's your ethnicity, then it becomes discriminatory.
Yes, I agree with that.
But this is another level, going all no foreigners.
So the reason why, so I looked into the framework here, and it gets kind of complicated again. I'm not a lawyer, so we're gonna get it. We're simplifying.
None of us are lawyers.
You did not come here necessarily for legal advice, okay?
Listen, Mom, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
None of my friends are lawyers. It's never gonna happen.
And we're not your lawyer.
We're not going.
So apparently so it's called freedom of contract, where private businesses can choose who they serve. And I think that's what you were talking about a little bit before.
Yeah.
Yes. Then it moves on to owners control their private property.
Yes.
Because they can and then they can set conditions.
Right.
This is the most important part though, is that Japan has no equivalent to the US Civil Rights Act for private businesses. No law prohibits discrimination against foreigners, men, women, LGBTQ people, or other groups as customers. So the US has that. And that's why they can say you have been discriminatory towards us.
Yeah.
But in Japan, that doesn't exist.
So you're saying that like they can just be discriminatory?
Yes, legally.
And that's legally. Okay.
Legally, they're allowed to discriminate against groups, which is kind of surprising to me.
It's not surprising because there are many signage. I don't know, like that's not my first time hearing it. Even restaurants having very blunt signs saying that no foreigners, no Chinese, or no Korean. You know, like there are signs like that, and they have been published on TV and never got any punishment. So I always know that there's, even for like a legit business, come on, not like a sex establishment. It's already in a gray zone to begin with. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's restaurants, bars, bathhouses, nightlife venue, gyms, they're all private spaces. And so there are limited industries that have anti-discrimination requirements. There are hotels, transportation, employment, and government. So like, if we're getting back to what we were talking about before about like rejecting people based on like their sex or their race or whatever, employment, they can't do it. So if we're working at a bathhouse or whatever, they can't.
Which
is theoretically, which is interesting.
Should we all apply to that bathhouse? Should we all just
next time
submit
an application?
Come on, labor shortage.
So, meiwaku boshi is considered in Japan like illegally, and I think we see that everywhere. It's risk management or whatever. We've even talked about it on video, being like, it just makes sense to us, right? And it's like, I think on a societal basis in Japan, it is considered like, oh, that person, foreigners cause nuisances, and therefore to reduce the likelihood of something happening, we're just going to block everyone. And I think that in Canada, I don't know if that would fly.
No, it would. Like,
right?
No,
I don't think it would.
In the US, it wouldn't either. I mean, I don't know what the civil rights movement was like in Canada.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a historian.
Because America has the history of black slaves who then, even after they were freed, had the discrimination and they had to like protest and face all the violence and discrimination to fight for that Civil Rights Act. I don't think Japan has ever had. Forgive me if I'm not up on my Japanese history. I don't think there was a similar movement in Japan for that.
If we're thinking about it from a cultural point of view, right? I think a language barrier is a huge thing here. So I was at a bathhouse, a different bathhouse actually recently, and I kind of saw this firsthand. There was a person who did not speak Japanese, and they were trying to communicate in English with the staff. And it was enough. Like, for what's the price? Here's the money, this and that. But once the person got in, they were confused about the layout of the system and everything, right? So they're kind of fumbling, trying to figure out the lockers, this and that. And so that person then, the receptionist, is that what they're called? The staff came up to help him. And then the confusion and it wasn't angry confusion, but it was just a lot of confusion. Like, this is where you put this and this is where you go and you have to do this. But they were not communicating well at all. Meanwhile, I'm waiting and then there was a line forming out the door. And I was at a point where I was like, should I just go and be the translator?
Yeah.
And then, but I thought, because this was really around the time that I was rejected, right? That I thought, this is a prime example of the nuisance. And like, let's say there was a couple people behind me. It's possible that someone can be like, fuck this and leave, right?
They're losing business.
Could lose business. And so this is the type of, these are the type of things that happen that fit into this whole like, you know, meiwaku boshi sort of thing. Just cut people out who can't speak Japanese or this and that, because at the end of the day, trying to accommodate everyone is gonna cost us business. So we're just cutting it, you know. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I am a child of God, so I have never been to one.
If you haven't seen Ted, let's go back to this video right here.
Listen, I don't know who that is. That's a different person. I think that was like pre-COVID, pre-ballroom, different Instagram handle. So people always talk about like anti-discrimination, and like it should be like a free-for-all. But I really feel like you can't really have a place like a Hatenba be open to everybody, because it'll collapse in on itself. Like, for example, like would a lot of the people who are talking about like, oh, you can't have anti-discrimination, or you can't have discrimination, you can't, discriminate against people, how would they feel about, for example, having like trans men in there? Like, is that a conversation that they're willing to have? And I'm not saying that there is like a right or wrong answer to that. Obviously, trans people deserve access to having sex and having a good time as well. But I think a lot of people only really get up in arms about it when it starts to affect them personally, and they're not really thinking about how it affects, for example, like the business or like the greater picture. At the same time, saying no foreigners is pretty harsh, I think. I think is my stance on that. I think there has to be a better way.
Daughter.
Oh. Yeah.
Speaking of someone who loves white dick, let's ask our...
Oh my god, you did not say
He'll
that.
edit it out.
You did not
He'll
say
edit
that.
it out. You can edit it out. I don't care.
We're gonna save it. We're gonna save this.
He knows.
Yeah, like what do you think about that like wide statement? So like absolutely like no foreign, doesn't matter if you speak Japanese, doesn't matter if you lived here, doesn't matter if you're paying your taxes here.
No, here's the thing. I feel like it's definitely too harsh. I feel like you have had so many foreigners, visitors coming to your place before. Like, does their good behavior doesn't count to the credibility that have built on? Like why do you allow one person to ruin the whole vibe? Also, I feel like a lot of my friends saying like, oh, they really had a great time over there. It's a really nice place, and they really enjoy going back. Like, it's very hard to say because I want to say like losing business, but it's actually not the case. Once foreigners going down, Japanese coming back. Yeah, that's like so.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I think they would actually attract more
Japanese
customers who want to like avoid foreigners. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Exactly. So a lot of you guys thinking like, oh, they're gonna lose business. That's not the case, because they have tons of Japanese people will love to go back there because of lower rate of foreigners.
Once again, men overestimating their importance.
There's 36 million people in Tokyo. Cutting out a certain group, there's always going to be, people who will visit these places, and they're small enough that they don't need, like, think of in Nichome how many bars there are, and they have 6 seats. Those bars that are like no foreigners, it's not going to hurt them. They're not going to go under, because all they need are like 6 or 7 people a day to keep afloat. And that's very Japan to me. Like in Canada, everything is so mainstream and like gets everyone, like everyone is allowed and everyone can go, because if people start dropping off, it becomes dangerous. But in Japan, it's just not there.
Well, I feel like it was like that before, but right now there's a rise of like anti-foreigner sentiment in Japan because of the tense of China and Japan at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So like a lot of Chinese tourists stopping coming to Japan, like a lot. So people were like saying, oh, the Japanese people gonna lose business and blah 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 on the internet. But like there was a actually recent video interviewing a restaurant owner in Kyoto asking なんか 中国人のお客さんが減りましたねみたいな感じのインタビューがあって、and she's like, yeah, but there's also なんか日本人のお客さん増えたから全然ビジネスに対して影響がないですよみたいな感じのビデオもあったんですね。So like a lot of people actually like Japanese people are so frustrated with over tourism, frustrated with like foreigners not able to speak Japanese, not respecting their culture, not only Chinese but also like American like people dancing on the in the subway or whatever. So there's a growing anti-foreigner sentiment, and actually Japanese people would love to go to places that doesn't have a lot of foreigners to begin with.
Yeah.
But actually I want to ask a question. Is it really discrimination?
To say no foreigners? Yes.
No. Like for example, there are original restrictions, like no long hair, like no. But if you just cut your hair, then you can't get a lot. Like it's not targeted to wear.
So what hair? Well, no.
You know what I mean? Like if you lose, sorry. Like
If you lose oh my gosh.
No, things that you can change about yourself, such as like your hair, which you can change if you wanted to go that far and get wigs, or your body weight, which you can change if you get like a personal trainer or whatever. It doesn't feel good to be like ousted because of that, but it's not the same as being flat across the board for something like your ethnicity, which you cannot change.
Yeah, I feel like Japan. We have a Japanese friend sitting on the sofa, but I'm gonna say this.
See him in the fridge.
Japan used to be a very rich country. Okay, they go out Japan and spending a lot of money, buying all the stuff, treating other places like a third world country and like undeveloped country. But now the situation has been switched, reversed. And a lot of foreigners coming to Japan spending all the money, and Japanese people are not happy because they're jealous. They're like, oh, that should have been us. We were in that position. But now like seeing なんかお金持ちのさなんか中国人とか他の外国人めっちゃお金をめっちゃ使ってるみたいな感じで見て there's some type of jealousy inside of it as well. I think because of the situation has been reversed. So it's not only hate but also like なんかもう我慢ずっとなんか怒りをresentment like they have accumulated that feeling and it all exploded because of immigration and low Japanese yen currency and a lot of things is going on. Not only one thing, I think.
I think that's certainly part of it. Well, there also is, I think, just the physical logistics of there being so many human bodies in spaces. Like, I mean, you have a fancy car now, but for those of us who have to use the brokey trains, who have to like crowd on, oh poor me, with like all these other foreigners, like it's a big change from even just a couple years ago, and I can definitely see why the average Japanese person could become annoyed with that, and maybe that annoyance is becoming they're seeking someone to blame, someone to take responsibility for it, and maybe they're misplacing that by putting it just on the foreigners entirely. But I can absolutely understand that like flow of how that would happen from your daily life becoming more annoying to that growing your feelings of resentment towards foreigners in general.
Yeah, I feel like it's very frustrating to see no foreigner banners, but it's just like also なんていうのもう今の世の中はこういう感じ There's nothing we can do. Like there's nothing you can change. You just have to wait until that situation being solved by itself. Maybe after a couple of years, Japan has a more like rich economy and the society does better. They don't see foreigner as like threat or as something dangerous, harming to their society. Maybe things will get more open. But I do feel this 1 or 2 years especially, I can definitely feel the anti-foreigner sentiment. I'm just repeating myself, like getting stronger and stronger.
Sure. I agree and disagree with you.
Okay, please say the disagree part.
Okay, well, so first of all, I agree that I don't think that there's necessarily anything we can do immediately to change the like anti-foreigner policy of a gay bathhouse. But like, I also don't think that we should just like necessarily sit on ourselves and like do nothing. Like the mindset of just like wait and see, I think is also not good. So I think it's better for people, and this is not like a social justice like call or anything, but I think it's better like if you are like upset with like a small incident such as like a discriminatory policy at a gay bathhouse, it's maybe better to look at the greater factors affecting that and pay more attention to, you know, like politics, policies, things that would influence that later on down the line, and put your energy into that rather than focusing just on I can't get into this one gay bathhouse. One among many.
Yes.
Not saying that it's right, but
yeah, I always said that like in in other videos as well. Like you have to treat bathhouse as a franchise, like a you have to see them not as individual store, but more like one of the many stores that Tokyo offers, you know, like they have places that restrict like people's age, not only nationalities. We're like, oh, this event is 39 and under. Right? Like there are a lot of times it's like that. So there's a private event or something, they want to create a certain vibe. Maybe that's, I'm sorry, like you're not included in that. But like there are other places being like, we only want 39 and above.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for events to curate their clientele. Of course, it doesn't feel good to be chopped. But at the same time, yeah, with no foreigners across the board, we can find a better way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm in the top 2%.
So
Suck on these nuts.